Welcome back, everybody, to Bio 5, Human Biology, and today we're going to talk about the cardiovascular system. The learning outcomes for today are identify the two components of the cardiovascular system, summarize the functions of the cardiovascular system, and explain the purpose of the lymphatic system in circulation. The cardiovascular system consists of the heart, which pumps blood, and the blood vessels through which the blood flows. It brings nutrients to cells and gets rid of waste. It also allows exchange of substances that occurs through the interstitial fluid. Here's a picture showing you the heart and the different vessels. It takes it to the respiratory system, where gas exchange occurs, where oxygen diffuses into our cell and CO2 diffuses out. It then brings that blood to the kidneys for filtration, and then picks up nutrients from the GI system. The purpose of circulation is to service our cells. The cells are surrounded by interstitial fluid that is used to exchange substances between the blood and cells. Circulation provides life-sustaining oxygen and nutrients to our body cells. It removes metabolic waste. It performs immune system-based functions. It also allows the maintenance of homeostasis in a variety of body conditions, such as pH balance, electrolyte levels. The lymphatic system assists the cardiovascular system by collecting excess tissue fluid and returning that into the blood. When the fluid enters the lymphatic vessels, it is called lymph. The types of blood vessels. Learning outcomes are: describe the structure and function of the three types of blood vessels. Explain how blood flow is regulated in each of the three types of blood vessels. The cardiovascular system consists of three types of blood vessels: arteries, capillaries, and veins. An artery has a thick muscular wall that transports blood away from the heart. The arterial wall has three layers. The strong walls of the artery give support to the blood that enters under a big amount of pressure. The endothelium is a thin inner epithelium layer. The middle layer is a smooth muscle layer that contains elastic tissue, and the outer layer is connective tissue. Here's a picture that compares the artery to a vein, and you can see the thickness of the artery just by the middle layer. Arterials are small arteries that have some elastic tissue. They're composed mostly of smooth muscle. These muscle fibers encircle the arteriole. When the fiber contracts, the vessel constricts. When these muscles relax, the vessel dilates and opens up. When a vessel constricts, it reduces blood flow and also raises blood pressure. When it dilates, it increases blood flow and reduces blood pressure. Arterioles branch into capillaries. Capillaries are the smallest of the blood vessels and the site of nutrient fluid exchange within tissue. The capillary beds are a network of many capillaries found in all regions of the body. They also contain precapillary sphincters, which control the blood flow through the capillary bed. They allow this phenomenon called shunting to occur to move blood quickly from one side to the other. Here's a picture showing you the conjoining of the arteriole to the venule and the capillary bed in the middle. The veins are blood vessels that return blood to the heart. Venules are small veins that drain blood from the capillaries and then join them to form a bigger vein. Their walls have the same three layers as arteries, but the middle layer is thinner, and the valves are extension of the inner wall layer found in the veins that carry blood against the force of gravity. Valves allow the blood to flow towards the direction of the heart, and when they open, they prevent the black flow of blood when they're closed. Valves allow the blood to flow only toward the heart when open, and prevent the black flow of blood when it's closed. At any time, they store about 70% of the blood, and if blood is lost, such as a wound or an injury, the nervous system causes the veins to constrict to increase the blood volume. The heart is a double pump. Learning outcomes are: identify the structure and chambers of the human heart, describe the flow of blood through the human heart, explain the internal and external controls of the heartbeat. The heart is a cone-shaped muscular organ that's located between the lungs and directly behind the sternum. The heart is tilted so that the apex is oriented on the left side of the body, and the heart is made out of myocardium, or muscular tissue, that is surrounded by a membranous sac called the pericardium. The pericardium supports and protects the heart. These muscle fibers are branched and connected by intergalactic discs that contain these proteins called gap junctions. And they're also connected by desmosomes, which is a kind of cell junction that prevents overstretching. Here's a picture of a heart. Inside the pericardial fluid is a lubrication fluid that allows the pericardium to slide smoothly over the heart surface as a chamber or pump. Internally, a wall called the septum separates the heart into the right and left sides. The heart has 4 chambers, the right and left atria, the upper 2, and the right and left ventricles, the lower 2. Here is some of the external anatomy of the heart. You can see the atria and the ventricles. You can see that there's a left side and a right side, and several noticeable big blood vessels extending from the heart. Heart valves keep blood flowing in the right direction and prevent backflow. Atrioventricular valves, AV valves, are found between the atria and ventricles and are supported by fibrous strings called the chordae tendineae. The AV valve on the right side is called a tricuspid valve, and then the one on the left is called the bicuspid valve. There's also the semilunar valves, which are found between the ventricles and the attached vessels. The pulmonary semilunar valve is located between the right ventricle and the pulmonary trunk, and the aortic valve is lied between the left ventricle and the aorta. Here is a picture of the internal structure of the heart, and you can see the valves listed: the tricuspid, the bicuspid, the pulmonary semilunar, and the aortic semilunar in the back. Coronary circulation, the heart's blood supply. The myocardium receives oxygen and nutrients from the coronary arteries. The coronary veins drain it and empty into the right atrium. Coronary artery diseases are whenever there's a blockage in the coronary arteries. That can cause a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. Blood flow through the heart. This sequence traces the path of blood from the body through the heart. Deoxygenated blood enters the superior and inferior vena cava to the right atrium, passes through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle, passes through the pulmonary semilunar valve to the pulmonary trunk, into the pulmonary arteries, and into the lungs. The pulmonary capillaries within the lungs allow gas exchange to occur. Then from the lungs, oxygenated blood goes back towards the heart via the pulmonary veins to the left atria, passes the atrioventricular valve to the left ventricle, and into the body through the aorta. The oxygen-poor blood never mixes with the oxygen-rich blood. The walls of the left ventricle are thicker than the right ventricle because it requires the pumping of the blood to the entire body and not just the lungs. The walls of the atria are thinner than the ventricles. The cardiac cycle. Each heartbeat is called the cardiac cycle. Systole is referred to as contraction of the heart chambers, and diastole refers to the relaxation. The heart sounds, lub-dub, are due to the closing of the atrioventricular valves, followed by the closing of the semilunar valves. A murmur is a swishing sound between a lub and a dub. So it sounds like a leakage or a blockage. A lub, sh, dub. Or a lub, dub, sh. Over here's a picture showing you different cycles. A, B, and C. You can see that in the A picture, the atrias are contracting down. In the B picture, the ventricles are contracting up. And C, the blood is returning into the heart and recharging, recycling. Internal control of the heart. The heart contains an internal control system that regulates the heartbeat. The rhythmic contraction of the atria and ventricles is due to an internal conduction system of the heart. These are also known as the nodal tissue, which is a type of cardiac muscle that has both muscular and nervous tissue. The sinoatrial SA node initiates a beat that causes the atria to begin contracting. SA node is also called the pacemaker. The atrioventricular node, AV node, conveys a stimulus and initiates contraction of the ventricles. The signal for the ventricles to contract travels from the AV node through the atrioventricular bundle to a smaller set called the Purkinje fibers, and this will cause the ventriculate to contract. This will then cause the ventricles to contract. Over here is a picture mapping out the SA node to the AV node down to the branches of the atrioventricular bundle and the Purkinje fibers. External control of the heartbeat. The body has an external way to regulate heartbeat. A cardiac control center in the medulla oblongata in the brain regulates the heartbeat by way of the parasympathetic system by slowing down the heart rate. Some hormones can also increase heart rate, like adrenaline. An electrocardiogram is a record of the heartbeat. An electrocardiogram, ECG, is a recording of the electrical changes that occur in the myocardium during an entire cardiac cycle. The P wave signals the atria are about to contract. The QRS complex signals the ventricles are about to contract. And the recovery of the ventricles produce what we call the T wave at the very end. EKGs can be used to detect various types of abnormalities, including ventricular fibrillation, and even it's now on the Apple Watch. Ventricular fibrillation is caused by uncoordinated, irregular electrical signals to the ventricles. Therefore, the heart can't pump blood, and the tissues become starved of oxygen. Defibrillation is applying a strong electrical signal to reset the heart, and hopefully this node will start firing again. Features of the cardiovascular system, learning outcomes are: understand how the pulse relates to the heart rate, explain how blood flow and pressure differs in veins, arteries, and capillaries, distinguish between the systolic and diastolic pressure. When the left ventricle contracts, a surge of blood flows through the arteries. Blood pressure is highest in the aorta and lowest inside the superior and inferior vena cava. The surge of blood entering the arteries following a heartbeat causes the elastic walls to stretch and then recoil. This is then felt as a pulse. The pulse rate of a radial and carotid artery indicates roughly the heart rate. It can range from 60 to 80 beats per minute. The contraction of the ventricles creates this blood pressure, which propels the blood through the arteries, and this can be measured via a device called a sigmometer. Over here is a picture showing you a sigmometer in the brachial cuff, along with a gauge and then a pump. Blood flow is regulated. The beating of the heart is necessary for homeostasis because it creates a pressure that propels the blood in the arteries and into the arterioles. Blood pressure is the pressure of the blood against the wall vessel and is usually measured at the brachial artery. The higher number is the systolic pressure, and the lower number is called diastolic pressure. Normal blood pressure is 120 over 80, systolic over diastolic. High blood pressure is called hypertension, and low blood pressure is called hypotension. Here's a chart that shows you some of the values. Normal conditions should be below 120 for systolic, and then below 80 for diastolic. Prehypertension is ranging from 120 to 139, systolic, and then diastolic would be 80 to 89. Anything over 180 is considered a hypertensive crisis, where emergency care is needed. Anything over 110 for diastolic is also hypertensive crisis. Blood flow. Blood pressure decreases as it flows away from the heart. It slows in the capillaries and increases the exchange of gases, nutrients, and waste. This can be adjusted by the precapillary sphincters. This slow pace allows more time for exchange and makes more efficiency. Here's a picture showing you the blood flow and the changes to the speed of flow. You can see that the arteries contain a faster, higher pressure. As it goes down to the capillaries, it drops down, and by the time it gets to the veins, it's close to very low. Blood pressure is very low in the veins, so it doesn't contribute to much of the movement of blood. The venous return and the return of blood from the veins require three factors: skeletal muscle pump, depending on movement and contraction of the muscle; respiratory pump, depending on breathing; and of course the valves inside the veins. Here's a picture of the valves inside our veins. You can see the valves close to ensure no backflow of the blood. Two cardiovascular pathways. Learning outcomes are: compare blood flow in the pulmonary and systemic circuits. Identify the major arteries and veins of both the pulmonary and systemic circuits. Compare the oxygen content of the blood in the arteries and veins of the pulmonary and systemic circuits. And explain the location and purpose of the hepatic portal system. The blood flows in two circuits, the pulmonary and systemic circuits. The pulmonary circuit circulates the blood through the lungs, and the systemic circuit serves the needs of the body tissue. These circuits also deliver a variety of nutrients, hormones, and other factors that are both important in the maintenance of homeostasis of the body. Here's a picture that maps out the flow of both the systemic and the pulmonary circuits. The pulmonary circuit, exchanges of gases. In the pulmonary circuit, the pulmonary arteries take blood from the right ventricles to the lungs. Carbon dioxide, CO2, is given off, and oxygen is picked up. The pulmonary veins return the blood to the left atria, and the pulmonary arteries carry oxygen-poor blood, while the pulmonary veins carry oxygen-rich blood. The systemic circuit, exchanges inside the interstitial fluid. The systemic circuit includes all arteries and veins. The largest artery in the systemic circuit is the aorta, that receives blood directly from the heart. The largest vein is also known as the superior and inferior vena cava. The vena cava empty into the right atria. Here's a picture that maps out the tracing of the arteries and the veins in the body. It also contains a listing of the common arteries and veins. Going up the neck, we have the common carotid artery and jugular vein. On the arm, we have the brachial artery. Inside the GI system, we have the inferior mesenteric artery. And then we also have the renal vein and renal artery. And then coming down, we have the femoral artery, femoral vein. And then we also have the longest vein called the great saphenous vein in the leg. Usually, blood flows from the aorta into the artery that supplies an organ, then through veins back to the one of the vena cava. That is, aorta goes to the renal artery, goes to the kidney, goes back to the renal vein, and goes back towards the inferior vena cava. However, there are some special routes that don't follow this pathway. For example, the hepatic portal system. The hepatic portal system drains blood from the capillary beds of the digestive system tract to the capillary beds inside into the liver. The liver purifies all the blood of toxins and pathogens, cleans it up, and after the blood has filtered through the liver, it is collected by the hepatic vein and returned directly to the inferior vena cava. Exchange of the capillaries. Learning outcomes are: describe the process that moves materials across the walls of the capillary. Explain what happens to the excess fluid that leaves the capillaries. Blood pressure and osmotic pressure are the two forces that control movement of fluid through the capillary wall. Blood pressure tends to cause fluid in the blood to move from the capillary into the tissue spaces. Osmotic pressure tends to cause the water to move in the opposite direction, so it favors absorption. Over here is a picture that shows you this concept. At the arterial end of a capillary, the blood pressure is higher than the osmotic pressure. Therefore, the water exits the capillary at this end. So you can see the water going out of the vessel. At the venial end of the capillary, the osmotic pressure is greater than the blood pressure. The water tends to move into the capillary bed. This causes excess interstitial fluid to be left behind in the capillary beds and is collected then as lymphatic fluid. So you can see now the water goes back in. The excess fluid drains into that green vessel called the lymphatic vessel, so that doesn't cause your body to swell up.